Hello, everyone. I'm Phil, and I'm the host of the Moto Beamer Show. Today's guest is Dylan Code from the California Superbike School. The California Superbike School has been around for 44 years. For the next hour and 10 minutes, Dylan and I get into some great conversation, not only about riding motorcycles and training folks to ride motorcycles, but the science and the physics behind how a motorcycle corners. Dylan even lobs a few questions at me. We talk about motorcycles in space, and there are a few things that I just don't know the answer to. So please make sure to check out their website, superbikeschool.com, as well as their Instagram page at Superbike School. Guys, it's my distinct honor to get this episode started, so let's make it happen. All right, everybody, welcome to the show. Very special guest, needs no introduction, but I'm going to do the introduction anyway. That's Dylan Code right there, and behind him, California Superbike School. California Superbike School. Dylan, welcome to the show, man.
Thank you very much.
I'm honored to have you on the show. I think what you're doing out there for the public and teaching and, the legacy of your school is absolutely incredible. You've been around, 40 years, something like that?
Yeah, this is our 44th year.
44 years. So I am 46 years old. If that tells you anything, like you guys have been around a long time on every continent but Antarctica, but I heard you're trying to get on Antarctica. Is that correct?
No, but that would be interesting though, wouldn't it? Yeah, maybe with global warming, then it'll be possible.
Right. About racing in the elements, man. That would be crazy. You have to put spikes on the bike and all that stuff like they do. I think it's at Norway or Finland or something like that. But
yeah, we have gone up to, we've done stuff. There was a track up in Norway called Arctic Circle. And you go there in the summer and, the days basically don't end. It's pretty cool.
That is really cool. What is the, see, we're already getting off topic, off topic. What's the danger level there with because don't they run like the spike tires? I know there's like guards on them, but does anybody ever get hurt?
Oh, I have no idea. That's like way out of my wheelhouse. It's something that looks amazing because the grip is just outstanding. Uh-huh. And I know a lot of people up in like the Great Lakes area, they find a lake that's frozen over during the wintertime. That stuff looks absolutely killer. I'd love to try it out sometime.
Yeah, especially trying to spin the tire, because then you're just like gripping ice and ripping it up, and it seems like it'd be pretty fun. But this actually does lead into my first question, which, I like to start things off, get a little spicy. But we talked on the phone, and you said something to me that I wrote down that I was like, that's incredible perspective, because you are on every continent except Antarctica, and you teach and you see people ride from all over the world. You've been doing it for a long time now. And you said to me, and I'm not going to try to quote you, I'll paraphrase it, but in all your travels, you have found that the students or your students in other parts of the world are actually more proficient or a higher caliber rider than those that you train in the U.S. I thought that was absolutely fascinating. So if you want to go into that, it might hurt some feelings, but I'm okay with it.
Yeah, I think, but obviously we're talking about averages, and this is just my own observations and perhaps biases, but there are certain areas of the world where it just seems that the caliber of rider is higher. And we could just speculate as to why, but one good example is in South Africa, the number of really good riders that we trained was incredibly high. And I think that might have something to do with the fact that when someone dives into a hobby, such as riding motorcycles, they really immerse themselves in it. Whereas in America, you've got your motorcycles, you've got your snowboarding, you've got all these other activities that you could perhaps do. So you find people that maybe are jack of all trades and a master of none. Whereas, again, in these other areas, someone might just immerse themselves completely and become very good at it. Not that being in another part of the world is going to predispose someone to being a better rider, but it really just comes down to, hey, how much has that person devoted themselves to their craft?
That's I think that applies, no pun, maybe a pun, but how much do they apply themselves? Were these riders, in your experience, more trying to become better racers, or were they just trying to become better motorcyclists in general?
Okay, well, again, my sample size isn't huge, but it's really both. Someone gets into something, they get into something. You kind of see this sometimes in Japan as well, where someone will get into some subgenre of whatever it happens to be, but they really immerse themselves into it, whether it happens to be dressing up like a cowboy or getting fully into they'll find this little niche and they'll just find out all about it and really, really get into it. And that's really as a school, we're gonna find people that are all over the spectrum, and what we're just trying to do is take whoever they are and wherever they're at and improve them.
Mm-hmm. So we're talking about applying ourselves, and what you have found is those that apply themselves right without distractions, they seem to be a higher caliber rider, which makes sense. But on the other end of the spectrum, you've also told me that you actually recommend people don't get into motorcycling unless they can actually apply themselves. Is that correct?
Yeah, I kind of look at the school. We're not really here to boom the motorcycle industry or bring in a bunch of new riders. At least that's not our purpose. I kind of look at it as we give junkies clean needles. In other words, if you've decided to make the choice to ride motorcycles, we know it's dangerous, right? We're not running around trying to recruit people into the sport. That's somebody else's job, not ours. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it particularly, but it's just not our job. Our job is to take someone who's already bought into the whole package, including the danger, and do what we can to make them a safer rider and more in control.
You bring people into the school to become better riders. If you encountered folks that come in and say, I'm at whatever level proficiency rider, and it becomes immediately clear to you that like they are not at this level, we need to work on whatever it is you need to do because they've sort of exaggerated their proficiency.
Yeah. Okay. So to take one quick step back, just to your earlier point, if I'm at some sort of social setting and meeting new people, what do you do for a living? And I say, well, we're in a motorcycle school. And usually someone has some little comment about how they would like to know how to ride a bike or something along those lines. And I just say, yeah, it's great. It's fun. And I wouldn't do it unless you can really devote yourself to it and you really put in the time and really develop that craft. We know that in aviation, it's not a good idea to go fly an airplane 3 times a year, or if, go scuba diving once or twice a year. You want to have that repetition. So that's what I tell people. Don't even bother unless you can really give yourself to that activity. Now, with regard to the school, how often do we get a rider who comes and they're just not ready? It's actually pretty infrequent, maybe 1 out of 1,000 or something like that. Oh, wow. And we do often have our off-track coaches available, and then we'll take them and we'll work at them on their level. We have got let's say a large skid pad area. We'll get them on a smaller bike and give them really, really focused one-on-one attention when we can do it. Of course, that's not what the school is about, and that's nothing we guarantee, but we have been put in that situation. If we do have the available manpower, then we'll do everything we can to help that person out.
So you talk about the school and you talk about the conversations you have when people find out what you do. I think within the scope of conversations, there's another phrase that kind of frustrates you. And, casually talking to other riders or people that know you ride motorcycles and people that, you're hanging out at the local spot, and a discussion comes up of, cornering or, some topic of motorcycle proficiency. And somebody will invariably say, hey man, just do what works for you. And I think, we talked about that. And when you were discussing that, I was like, this is his craft, and doing what works for you. You kind of dove into, yeah, but there's only the physics are the physics, right? Like getting a motorcycle through a corner only happens like one way. So do what works for you might not apply. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that's a real sort of middle of the road compromise, mealy mouse kind of just real easy way to settle an argument type thing. And while we do definitely have different techniques and different ways that one can use the controls for a given pass through, for a given corner, the physics that describes what's happening, there are no two ways about it, right? Of what is actually happening when someone goes through a corner at a particular time in a particular place. You can't look at it from different points of view. The physics are the physics. And when you get people who just talk about doing what works for them, the big problem is that we as riders invariably have these areas of strengths and weaknesses. So what works for you is often what might fit in between all of your strengths and weaknesses, but isn't necessarily overall the most efficient, fastest, safest, et cetera, way to go. And that's where I really try to get down to the specifics of, hey, what is really going on? What is the science behind riding? And then we can then work forward from there. But I'll also hear people say, well, I take a bunch of different schools and I read different books and I talk to different people and then I, take a little bit from everywhere and then I can, compile it into, my riding philosophy or what works for me. And that's, I get it and I understand it, but really it should be down to the science. And if we're talking about different schools or whatever, the physics and the science should all boil down to the same points. Mm-hmm. You can't say, oh, I know how to ride and my description or the physics of this is completely different. Not really. No. If you look at data from racers, we see variations from racer to racer, but for the most part, they're pretty darn similar. So that will also give you at least some sort of standard to understand that we don't see huge variations. We do see some variations, and again, that's down to where the rider's strengths and weaknesses are, or perhaps the type of machinery they're on, their bike.
You just talked about racers, and I'm going to go back to say Valentino Rossi, and he brought his team with him everywhere. Obviously, the most extreme example, but how important is that team to the effort?
The team is huge, and I think it's something that's often overlooked because I'll look at the rider and say, he's it. He could go anywhere and do well. We've already seen evidence that that's not true. When Rossi got on inferior equipment, then he wasn't performing as well. It's one of these things where you have to hit on all 8 cylinders, meaning every aspect needs to be perfect. In the old days, if we're talking about 80s, 70s, 60s, it didn't have to be that way. But nowadays, the talent pool is so rich. There's so many good riders. If we're talking about MotoGP, that really everything needs to be perfect. Your data guy really needs to know what he's doing, your suspension tech, et cetera. And I've talked to some people who are MotoGP racers, some friends, and discussed, hey, what is it like to be a MotoGP racer in the premier class? And especially for one of the smaller teams on a satellite ride, it usually goes something like this. Go out in FP1, the bike feels horrible. Come in, tell the guys what it feels like. It feels horrible. Okay, they change a bunch of stuff. You go on FP2, it's worse.
Oh, wow.
Okay, so now FP3, what are you going to do? Are you going to go back to that first horrible that wasn't quite as horrible as the second one? Or are you going to go in an entirely different direction? And you'll find that these race weekends are just everyone frantically chasing their tails, trying to get the right setup. And of course, if the weather changes or as the rider starts going faster and starts bringing their times down, then maybe that earlier setup that felt horrible now is actually the right setup. It just is very, very difficult. So really to be successful at the highest level, you need to have everything perfect nowadays. It wasn't that case earlier on, but now it seems to be the case.
And the difference between this feels great and horrible could probably be less than a second.
Oh, yeah.
The margins are that thin, probably.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for sure. The margins, are incredibly thin. I mean, it really depends on the track, but there are some tracks where first through 20th, let's say MotoGP or Moto2 or even Moto3, they're within a second. Some of the bigger, longer tracks like Silverstone, it might not be such a big difference. But yeah, it's the talent is so rich, so thick from first to last place.
And the proficiency level, you brought up an example, by the time they get to that level, I mean, they've probably thousands and thousands of races, but you brought up an example of, and we're getting back to proficiency and being able to ride a motorcycle well. I think you said that there was somebody, a kid at your school, maybe he's 11 or 12 years old, and people were looking at him flying around the track, and you're like, this kid's been in like 600 races already. And you go to a track day once every 2 years or whatever it is, and you can't compare the dedication or level of proficiency. Obviously, there's a cost factor involved, but right, that takes extreme dedication. Yeah,
and we have that Malcolm Gladwell book, Outliers, where he theorizes 10,000 hours is what someone needs to be really good at something, to be an outlier, to be an exception to the rule. And of course, that's not scientifically proven, but I think the main point is that you really have to apply yourself to your craft. And I was talking to one of our former coaches whose son started racing, Stoney Landers, and his son Rocco started racing, and Rocco's done really well in Moto America, and it looks like he might do really well again this year. But in Spain, where we do see in Europe, but particularly Spain and also Italy, you'll find the kids going out to parking lots on weeknights, and all the families will get together, and the kids will go run drills with cones in parking lots on their little bikes. But they'll do that for hours. And we're talking, that's in between race weekends, and then they're going to be running multiple races. They really apply themselves to their craft. So when you see this MotoGP star step out of out of his chair and onto his bike, you think, oh, that guy's like, really, really proficient. And, he's got that magic touch in the DNA. And I'm not a believer of someone having motorcycle riding competence DNA. I'm much more of a believer of you gotta put your time in.
I'm going to ask the question anyway, but man, you stepped ahead of me on that one. I was going to say, this is what you do. You train people for a living. So is there an example, or is there natural gifted talent?
I wouldn't say that there's natural gifted talent in the way that you can just say that flat out. There's going to be a lot of other factors that combine, whether someone has an epigene that predisposes them to being a better rider. I don't know. That would be very, very difficult to figure out. But yeah, you do have some people with more aptitude, and it might have to do with other things earlier in their lives that have led up. They've created pathways, neural pathways that lend themselves to doing that. But I've seen people come to the school who were miles from nowhere. I mean, we're talking dead slow, horribly slow, so much you kind of just feel sad and embarrassed for them, right? Wow. Because you can tell they really came with this desire to be good. And okay, they improve. Not much, but they improve. And then they come back, and then they improve a little bit, just barely perceivably. But, that they're getting better, that's always encouraging for them. And on a number of occasions, I probably can cite at least more than a dozen, maybe a few dozen, they keep on coming, keep on getting better. So these are people that have no predisposition in any way, shape, or form to being good riders. But they just stuck with it, and they got better, incrementally better, and then suddenly something just breaks, and then they take this steep sort of rocket ride, and then they go up to some new level. But for them, it took a lot of time. I've also seen other people who, from the get-go, they are doing really, really well, but then they plateau off, or perhaps even regress for a while, and then need to kind of fall back and regroup and then get better. So I've seen all these different curves as far as progression goes. And there's really no rhyme or reason to it.
I equate it to like a scale of, you start doing track days, and then maybe you start amateur club racing, and you start with your yellow plate, and your goal is to get to the experts, the white plate. So, if the expert level is, say, a 7 out of 10, like you start doing track days and you get a little faster. You look like, I can do this. Then you go to the amateur place. You're like, man, I'm really good. Now you're a 6 and a 6.5. And then once you hit like a 7, just to go from 7 to 7.1 is like incredibly hard. Like, because now everybody's fast, right? And how do you, to your latter point or example, somebody that's at that plateau, they've plateaued at like, I'm pretty quick, but I just can't break through. I can't get that 0.1 to 0.2. How do you work with somebody like that? What is it, a mental thing, or because now you're chasing tenths, right? What's your strategy there?
Well, that's a good example when you go back to the person who has figured out what works for them. Basically, they've adopted these habits or patterns that work for them up to a certain point, and they've repeated them so much, they've become so ingrained that they couldn't change how they were riding if they wanted to. And well, they could, but it would just be a lot harder. And that's where going to a school and having drills that that force you out of your comfort zone and force you to do things that you wouldn't necessarily do under normal circumstances that would be helpful or appropriate. That's where we find these riders get stuck, and they need to jump out of this rut that they've gotten into, and they normally aren't going to do that all by themselves.
Are you pretty candid with folks? Like if it's me and I'm there, you're like, hey, Phil, like if you don't fix this, you will never, you know what I mean? Like, or like, what's the approach? You know?
Well, if we're talking about the normal person that comes to our school, which are your average street rider up through, let's say, track day enthusiast, okay, we're not taking that really intense stance. But if the person, and I do have some friends that are like, I want to go fast. I want to bridge the gap from, let's say, club racing to Moto America, and they're very serious about it. Then, of course, if we see something that needs to be fixed and fixed quickly, then we're going to say, hey, this is the reality. This is what needs to be squared away with your riding if you're going to get any further.
And I would appreciate that approach. Like, hey, man, you need to do this or it's never going to improve. And so talking about doing this and getting through a corner, this is the question I wanted to ask a little bit ago. Can you verbalize or talk me through this? I've never asked anybody this question. I'm excited to ask you this question. From the moment I start setting up for a corner to the moment I've already rolled the throttle, I'm heading straight, that progression, right? That's what you teach, I'm assuming, right? Like that is the thing. Can you talk me through the perfect, obviously corners are different, off camber, on camber, and all the things, but just generically through a corner, what's the best scenario there?
Well, if you were looking for, let's just say, speed. Well, let me just make one comment earlier. So with a racer, we're going to tell them, hey, you're never going to make it unless you change X, Y, or Z. When we have our regular students, we'll have those real heart-to-heart conversations that they're doing something dangerous.
Yes.
Then we'll say, hey, look,
absolutely,
do not do that anymore. I'm telling you, if you were my cousin, uncle, or whatever, and you were doing that, I would come at them the exact same way. This is from a point of caring, but this little habit that you've developed or whatever, we need to fix that. So as far as getting through a corner, ideally, we would have to, okay, of course, there's so many different variables, but an interesting way to look at it would be from the viewpoint of an engineer. And the engineer is going to look at data, right? So this is really common in the car world. They'll use the traction circle, which basically graphically shows G-forces. In a very, very broad theoretical sense, what we're trying to do is use maximum traction at all stages of the corner. So on approach, let's say it's a corner you have to slow down for. So on approach, the rider's going to be on the throttle for as long as possible, and then they are going to go to the brakes as late as possible and as hard as possible. And then they're going to start leaning the bike in, and then they're going to then ease off the brakes while leaning the bike in. So as they introduce that lateral load, the cornering load, they're going to decrease the braking or the longitudinal load to the point where they get the bike to whatever full lean angle is for them on that corner. And that would be using the maximum traction mid-corner, transitioning up out of the corner, using maximum throttle possible with the lean angle as it's coming away. So really the best way through a corner would be using maximum traction throughout the entire turn. Now, of course, if you are a canyon rider, you wouldn't want to be using maximum traction because that means you've got no room for error, no room for anyone coming off into your lane or anything like that. But I guess we just have to have context to that question. But that's essentially, if we're looking for all-out speed, that would be it.
And you mentioned, so I remember when I did my first track day, all I wanted to do was touch my knee to the pavement. That was as long as I did that, I don't care how fast I was going. And I think you mentioned maximum traction, and we sort of glorify, and rightfully so, because you get these pictures of these GP riders at like these insane lean angles, but they're on like $1 million equipment, right? So for the average rider that's maybe at a track day or whatever, I guess the question is, more lean angle doesn't necessarily mean more speed or better cornering. Is that correct? Because of the traction component?
Well, when we're looking at lean angle is one very, very important part of getting through a corner, but it intertwines with things. For example, G-force, the amount of stress you're putting on the tire, right? That lateral load, right? Lateral acceleration, right? That's what it's referred to as. Lateral acceleration can be measured without lean angle, can be measured with GPS. In other words, he was here, then he was here, then he was here, then he was here. And that would plot an arc, and that would give a certain amount of lateral load. So that would be that force at the contact patch, basically. So where the rider's body is in relation to the motorcycle can change where the bike is leaned, right? But the amount of traction that you're using up has more to do with that actual arc or path that you're taking to the corner. Because again, the amount of G-force or load that you're putting on the tire can be measured, like I said, with GPS. So lean angle in leaning the bike, that is a major component with how a motorcycle goes through a corner. And I was talking to the Dunlop engineers. When you're riding a motorcycle, well, let's just say we're in outer space and we have an object. Let's say we're swinging a weight from a string and then we let it go. Okay, so it was going around in circles and then we let it go. Will it go straight or will it arc?
In space?
Yeah.
Oh, man. That's a great question. I think it's going to go straight. I could be wrong. I don't know.
Yeah, it'll go perfectly straight forever unless it's acted upon by another force.
Okay.
Right? So let's say we had a motorcycle in outer space and it's moving along. If there's nothing affecting it, and the object in motion will stay in motion and will go perfectly straight. Now, if you're going perfectly straight in outer space and you wanted to move off in another direction, you would actually have to send, let's say it's a rocket or whatever, we'd have to send a jet out to the outside. In other words, push that rocket to the inside. Does that make sense?
It does.
Now, if we did it just once, then it would change direction and would go straight again. But if we continued, it would arc, correct?
Correct.
And that would be a force to the inside of that arc, correct?
Correct.
That's called centripetal force to the inside. So, force to the inside, right?
Okay.
So if you got a rocket going through outer space and it's going straight and you want it to arc over someplace, you're going to have to send a rocket out to force it to the inside of that arc. Now, a motorcycle, in order to get through a corner, it has that forward component, but it also has to have that force or impulse towards the inside of the corner. Centripetal, that's a force to the inside. So forward plus force to the inside equals an arc. Does that make sense?
It makes sense.
Good. The question is, where does that centripetal or that force to the inside, that force come from? And it comes from a couple different factors, but most notably, especially at speed, it comes from the shape of the tire. Tire shaped like a cone. You get something conical and you roll it on the ground, it goes around in circles. So we get a lot of that. So that's called camber thrust. It's another name for it, but it's that thrust to the inside from the conical shape of the tires. Now, when you lean the bike over, right, the lean angle gives us that camber thrust, which gives us that arcing. So yes, lean angle is needed to get through a corner. I know that was a really long way of answering the question.
I got a serious education there. Holy smokes.
Yeah, but we as motorcyclists, it would be nice to understand how we go through a corner. And I was talking to Dunlop engineers about it, and I said, "Hey, so where's the majority of the camber thrust come from when a motorcycle goes through the corner? The camber thrust, again, meaning that force to the inside." They said, "Yeah, it's the conical shape of the tires." Because I've already put onboard cameras on the gas tank. You can see the handlebars moving while the rider's riding, but not much. Mm-hmm. At low speeds in a parking lot, yes. We see, full lock, that type. At speed, the majority of really what's forcing that bike on an arc is the bike being leaned over and on basically the conical shape of the tires that's guiding it through. So yes, I know it's kind of technical what I went through, but I'm kind of a technical guy. And,
you asked me that question about the arc and I was like, oh my God, yes, no, straight. Or just like, yeah, I don't know the answer to that, but that's the perfect example of, not only do you, I'm just fast, so I'm going to teach other people, but it's like, it's the science of riding a motorcycle through a corner in the most efficient manner. Maybe I'm saying that wrong, but that sounds like what you're describing. Like you have studied for years and years and years to figure out how this happens.
Yeah, the science is, well, I guess my dad's always been into the science of motorcycles, and we have consulting physicists that we use for proof of concept. And I did a really interesting training program with BMW. They had this World Superbike Engineer program, which I attended, and it was like definitely drinking from a fire hose. I did okay in math in school, but I had to really dig deep into my past to make it to understand or to keep up. There was a lot of graphs. Everything in riding was on graphs, on X, Y plots, etc. And I started to actually rewire myself and think in those terms, which was a real challenge, but it was incredibly enriching for me. And it just, I think, propelled us even further into the technical side of riding. And then, of course, my job is to simplify it and then tell somebody what to do and in a way that they'll understand it and feel better about the riding.
So I feel like anybody that watches or listens to the last 10 minutes of this, to bring it all the way back to do what works for you, I think you can kind of see or understand just how absurd that statement is when you break down like how to get through a corner. Well, it's just not how it works.
Yeah. I mean, if someone says, I read Sir Isaac Newton's Principia Mathematica, and there's a few things in there that I can take and use. Maybe I'll gather some knowledge from elsewhere. I'm like, well, it's a pretty good text. Pretty much lays out how things, the physics of things. You'd probably be better if you just stuck with that. But I think I always tell my students, look, everything that we're talking about does have to have some basic, some basis in physics, because that's the most senior science in the world. That physics is the one that rules them all. I mean, you could talk about mathematics being a science, and some people consider it a language rather than a science in itself. And I certainly am not quite smart enough to get into a debate about that. But physics is basically where pretty much all the other sciences come from, and it describes how matter and energy behave, and that's what we're dealing with on motorcycles. A lot of matter and energy.
So I have you on the show. I got you on the spot. I have two questions that I want to ask that I know you're going to have the perfect answer for. These are questions that sort of are like, what oil is best? And it's like the longest thread ever, and everybody's got an opinion. So I'm going to ask the first one. How important is it when you're going through a corner to weight the outside peg?
Well, if you look at the physics, we know that force applied within a system will balance itself. So if you're sitting in the passenger seat of a car and you push on the dashboard, will the car move forward?
No.
Okay. You have to open the door and put your foot out, don't you?
Yes.
Get it?
I get it.
Good. So this concept, now here's the thing, just let's go a little bit further. Person sits on the seat, which is connected to the subframe, which is connected to the mainframe. Yes?
Yes.
Good. The foot peg connected to the rear set, which is also connected to the mainframe. And
right.
They come together at pretty much the same point.
Right.
You get it? So let's just say we were going through a corner and we had a hydraulic jack welded to the mainframe and it pressed down on the foot peg. Would that vary your line at all? No, the foot peg would break off.
Hey guys, it's Phil again, and I hope you're enjoying this episode. Sorry to interrupt, but I got to share a couple things with you. Number one, if your business is interested in being on the podcast and using all the promotional materials that I create, please email me at phil@motobeamer.com. Number two, if you're enjoying this podcast episode, please hit that like and subscribe button. It really helps the channel out. Lastly, and once again, please make sure to visit superbikeschool.com. That's the California Superbike School website where you can view their 2024 schedule. You can find out what their school is all about, watch videos, look at pictures, read the FAQ section, or shoot them a DM on Instagram at Superbike School. All right, with that, let's get back to the episode.
The bike wouldn't go anywhere differently. So there's probably there could be other things the person's doing with their body when they are putting weight on a certain part of the bike that may seem to work, but the explanation might be wrong. For example, in the primitive tribe, they said that there's evil spirits in that pool of water because people go in and they die. Well, that would be an incorrect explanation. It still keeps people from getting killed, but it has something more to do with some bacteria in it, right? So someone might say, you do this because it brings this result. Their explanation might be totally incorrect, but it gets them to do something else, which actually does seem to get a better result. But the physics don't really validate that.
I love two things. The fact that you're like, here's the scientific answer, but also it's like you give a great example of like, if you're in the passenger seat of a car. So it's like, oh, I can understand that. That makes sense. Yes, no, tied it to the hydraulic jack. Second question, rear brake. Obviously different applications if you're trying to break a lap record on a track and you're on the street, but very controversial topic. Do what works for you kind of thing. How important is it? How important is that rear brake, especially on a sport bike or even an adventure bike when I'm out cornering? I would love to hear your qualified, scientific, like your answer to that.
Okay, there's a bunch of different answers, but I would say in the highest levels of racing, MotoGP, you're going to see the rear brake used all the time. I've seen it on the data, and they're not using initially as they're trailing off the front brake. So they'll go to the front brake. As they're trailing off of the front brake, then a little bit of rear brake will be brought in and then back to the throttle. So the number of people not using the rear brake in MotoGP across all classes is going to be very, very low. Okay, let's then bring in some more context. Sylvain Guintoli won the World Superbike Championship some years ago. Didn't touch the rear brake the entire season. Okay. Then later on, he's a test rider for Suzuki and MotoGP, using the rear brake all the time. So that tells us that it's not absolutely mandatory, but also the bike might feel better. I've had some bikes where I'm using the rear brake going into the corner and the rear end just starts dancing all over the place. It's completely distracting. But I've also had other bikes where give it a little bit of rear brake under hard braking and it really just corrects the attitude, makes it feel so much more solid. So it can depend on the bike. It can depend on the application and it's most certainly the type of turns.
Yeah.
What I say is the rear brake. I consider the rear brake a great tool on canyon roads. You're just cruising along, turn after turn. You get into a corner, you go, ooh, it's a little tighter than I thought it was. Well, chopping the throttle and then going to the front brake, that's going to upset the bike quite a bit. Maybe you only need to get rid of just a few miles per hour. Drag the rear brake a little bit. That bleeds off that speed. The bike doesn't pitch forward unnecessarily, and you're in. So I think it's more of a situational application, but in general, people are going to be talking more and more about the rear brake, especially in the track riding space, because just about everyone's using it, but not using it super heavily. It's really more of a little trim adjuster during the phase of releasing the front brake.
Two things I've heard, settle the chassis going into a corner, or what you probably just described, tightening up your line. Would those be correct assumptions?
Yeah. So one of the things is just going to bleed off speed. You bleed off speed at a specific lean angle, your arc's going to tighten. That's about as easy as it gets. Now, when you do use the rear brake, it'll flatten the bike out, meaning it'll take it off of its nose. And normally someone would say, well, we want a bike on its nose because that makes it turn quickly. And while that's true, that makes it lean, but not necessarily arc. So we'll have a bike that, let's say, has a lot of trail, meaning it's more choppered out, like let's say an adventure bike. Mm-hmm. You get an adventure bike into a corner. Once it's in the corner, it really is quite eager to follow that arc, right? You don't really have to hold it in there. It's just very eager to follow that arc. It's got a lot of trail. And what you're going to get is an increase of trail with the rear brake because it's going to squat the back end down slightly. Massive increase? No. And okay, we're starting to get into chassis and that type of thing. And I'm not going to pretend to be a specialist in that area. And it really appears to be a black art in many cases as far as suspension and chassis. So there's a lot of people that could probably shoot holes in what I just said, but quite a few more that will agree with it. And we do find that, especially with the double R, they were trying to make it longer, increase and actually flatten the bike out, get it off of its nose, because that would help with the mid corner face. So a lot of factors to consider, but there's your answer.
I love it. When you say people shooting holes in things, and I think you got these sort of armchair quarterbacks, and in my experience, it's this or that, and that kind of bleeds over into advice, right, for other riders and riders teaching riders versus what you do for a living. And you told me something else on the phone that kind of goes with that. You were like, you have the nearsighted leading the blind with respect to this. So this conversation, right, how to corner, how to use the brakes, do I weight the peg or not, right? And you go to any forum, well, whatever, and there's tons of opinions, or there's even videos. I'm going to teach you how to do this today, right? And you're like, it's the nearsighted leading the blind. And I thought I've never heard that description before, but I thought it was very applicable the way you described it. If you want to share your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's interesting. You go to YouTube and then you get on an algorithm and then it'll suggest other videos, that type of thing. And I've seen plenty of riding videos on YouTube. Some of them actually really good. And I'm watching it going, this guy has really got it together. I agree with that. That's great. That's great. That's great. And then suddenly, and in the middle of it is something that's completely like out of left field. And it's like about as wrong as you can get. Like just no scientific proof behind it whatsoever. And the explanation is really weak. And I'm going, well, I mean, I didn't pay any money to watch that video. And this person is obviously not giving information out that they consider incorrect. So, what are you going to do? It's probably better than not having anything out there. And it gets people thinking about technique. So that's good as well. But there is a fair amount of information out there that just isn't quite dialed in. And I think we just all need to understand that when we're watching those videos.
So I'm going to skip to the last question I had related to the newer crop of riders, because this is perfect when you're talking about watching YouTube videos and learning. So I'll use my brother as an example. He's 15 years younger than me. He bought his first motorcycle a couple years ago, and his generation, he consumes content on YouTube to learn how to ride motorcycles better, right? And from what I'm hearing you say, like you just got to, first of all, how would he know what's right, what's wrong, as long as the person is very easy to listen to, seems like they know what they're doing, but it could be dangerous, or they could be learning incorrect things, and then they bleed over, they do come to your school, and it's like, you need to start back over, relearn that, whatever it is. So what are your thoughts on that? I mean, I know I just asked you blind or nearsighted leading the blind, but you've got this newer generation of riders that we discussed that what they do is consume YouTube content to learn versus say, come to your school.
So I would say that overall on average, it's going to be better than not having that information. And the one thing that is detrimental is if they do latch onto something that's incorrect, it tends to stick with them. There's a well-known cognitive bias called the anchoring bias, where someone gives more importance or weight to the first piece of information they encounter on a particular subject. So if someone says, hey, this is the way you want to ride a motorcycle, this is a technique that you need to have, and it's the first time they hear it, they tend to stick with that, and they tend to use that as a lens to which anything else that they hear is viewed through. So that can be a bit detrimental, but it's hard to say. You see some of these people have a lot of viewers and a lot of comments, and they've figured out that game, and maybe the information isn't that great, but they're charismatic, they're excited. Some of these guys are real newbies, and they're so relatable because they're excited and they're talking about these different things, and the people watching them really feel like it's like one of their buddies that they're sort of bringing them up through the experience, which I think is great in many ways, but getting the technology exactly right. I mean, if we were talking about flying airplanes or whatever, or something super, super, super critical, then that's where you have to be very, very accurate. You can't just leave it to who knows who. I don't know. Maybe some people use YouTube to learn how to fly an airplane too. I don't know. It's just something that I consider very, very difficult, and I haven't jumped into because I don't have the time or the money to do that. But it's something that I would approach with an extreme amount of caution and really careful about finding reputable sources of information.
So this kind of helps us transition to the school itself. What would your message be as someone who does this for a living, that has trained probably thousands and thousands of students over decades? What would your message be to the newer generation, that newer crop of riders that might not even know about your school or understand what it's for? And they're like, I'm not going to be a racer, right? I just want to go out, every weekend and kind of cruise around or whatever it is. What's your message to them on the importance of your school, what it offers, what it provides, what they get benefit from by attending?
I would say that professional coaching is the shortcut to success. It really is. And we've had a lot of people come to the school say, boy, I wish I'd come to you guys 20 years ago because I thought I had 20 years of experience. I just had 1 year of experience 20 times over.
Mm. Wow.
And, some people don't want to miss out. Well, I mean, it's all an economics thing. They don't want to spend a bunch of money on training that might not do it for them, or, they just like the whole adventure of figuring it out for themselves. But when you do get professional coaching, it can really dial things in very, very fast, very, very quickly, and bring you up to that next level of comfort, security, confidence. I don't think there aren't very many people. In other words, there's going to be plenty of people who have gotten into a corner, especially in the early days of riding motorcycle, and the bike ran wide, and they weren't going very fast, and they felt like they were completely out of control. And then the next corner comes up, and then that was okay, but that last corner wasn't so good. And then they go through a few more corners, and they're all right. And then again, they ran wide, and they're going, how does this demon just pop up out of the blue? And they suffer with it, and they've got this big sort of mystery in the back of their head, like where is this coming from? And when you go get professionally trained, usually a coach doesn't need to follow you for more than about 3 or 4 corners, and then they can spot the major flaw in that person's skill set and then just drill right into it immediately. And that can really make the rest of that rider's days so much more fun and so much more enjoyable.
How does and this is going back to basics, the most basic question, how does what you teach on a racetrack, right, make somebody a better street rider? Because I think that there could be go to your website, it's just everybody's on race bikes and on a racetrack. That's not for me, right? Mm-hmm. There could be that perception. So how does riding on a racetrack on a super bike with you guys make me a better street rider on my adventure bike or even on my cruiser?
Yeah. Well, first of all, the majority of our riders that come to the school are your day-to-day riders. So very few racers, very few people that aspire to race. Now, when you're on a racetrack, the good thing is that you have these corners that you get to go through over and over and over again. So you can use them as a case study to work on one area of your technique. For example, you go through one corner and you blew it a little bit. You talk to your coach about it, and then you dial in something with your technique, and then you conquer it. And then you conquer it over and over and over, and then you regularly get that corner right. It really allows you that opportunity to tweak and dial things in. We've all been on some mountain road, blew a corner, and you're probably never going to go through the corner again, or you're going to go through the corner the opposite direction, and you're not going to get that challenge all over again. But on a track, you get that challenge over and over again. You also have no one coming the other direction, It's nice and wide. There's runoff. There are corner workers keeping an eye out and warning you if anything's up ahead. It's a real distraction-free environment. I say in general, most riders are going to have about, if you're riding on the street, you've got about 90% of your attention on threats, traffic, things like that, and perhaps 10% on your technique. On the track, it's reversed. You've got about 90% of your attention on technique and 10% on other possibilities of threats. So it really does give you this super saturated learning experience in time. For example, 1 hour on the track is going to be equal to far more, on the street. I mean, I don't know. It might be 10 to 1, 100 to 1. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. It is very evident to me at this point in time. I mean, obviously, I know you do this for a living, right? But just your approach, and it's been refined over years, decades, what you've learned from your dad. And this is the perfect time to dig into the legacy, right, of the Superbike school. You've trained the most students all over the world, your heritage, what you guys do. I mean, I was watching videos of your dad, when he was talking about racing in the 70s and how he, had to approach Kawasaki. And they're like, what are you talking about? Why would I put people on the racetrack? That's how you race, right? And, you've built this brand over time, and you are the largest. Is that correct? The largest in the world?
As far as like advanced riding
Yes.
school, track-based school, definitely. Yeah, we're the largest in the world. We've been to more tracks. I think it's 138 tracks worldwide, 43 countries. Our students have won 103 world and national championships, or our graduates went on to do that. So there's a lot of impressive numbers, but it's only as impressive to that individual comes to the school and improves their own riding. Maybe that just helps give them a little bit of confidence that when they show up at our doorstep, they'll be well taken care of. But still, every student that arrives is their own sort of puzzle that we have to figure out and make them better. And in our estimation, and of course in their own estimation.
How many times would you say, or how many students you personally, or any one of your coaches, how many students do they train a year, do you think?
So I've instructed personally 17,000 students so far. Our coaches,
insane.
Yeah, our coaches are going to do, I don't have the exact numbers. I know a full-time coach is going to ride about 1,200 riding sessions per year. Mm-hmm. And they'll coach up to 9. It depends on the program. We've got a single day school where our coaches will coach 9 students, or we've got a 2-day camp where they'll coach a total of 4. But they'll, maybe about 500 per year for a full-time coach. That might be on the high side, but there's a fair number. They do. We get one of everything. That's for sure. You get real fast guys. You get real slow guys that are, bass backwards, and we sort them out.
And back to proficiency, right? If I do one track day every 2 years, or if I, maybe I do 20, right? And it's like, well, how many students have you taught? Oh, I've taught like 30. It's like, well, I've taught 17,000. That helps build your model, I guess, of how to approach things and how to problem solve. And it kind of leads into my other question. We were talking about coaches, and does being a fast rider, I think I know the answer to this, but your answers have been incredible and a little bit surprising sometimes. Maybe I'm a fast rider, a fast racer. Does that mean I can be a coach at your school?
No, but it definitely gets the riding element out of the way. But we're not necessarily looking for a fast rider. They definitely need to be fast enough to keep up with the students, right? You can't be slower than them. But we're looking for someone who, hits a bunch of different points of criteria. Are they good learners themselves? Are they good communicators? Are they good observers? Can they follow instructions? Can they follow the protocols of the school? The school is a big machine and everyone has to work together. If someone is all on their own and just doing one-on-one private training, okay, they probably wouldn't have to have as many things nailed down in the way that we would like them nailed down in order to operate as a team. And I think really the synergy of the entire package at our school makes a big difference. I'll often have someone come to me and say, hey, how much is private coaching? And I'll say, okay, I have to get all the parameters. Do you want to rent an entire track? Do you want to come to a track day? And at the end of it, usually I'll just say, look, you could get a private coaching day, but showing up at the school, you've got this entire machine there, and our student services crew, our course control, we've got this entire machine that's going to take care of every little detail for you. So in many cases, just coming to the school and taking advantage of the machine works even better.
What makes a good coach? What makes your perfect ideal coach? What you talked a little bit about that, but if I was like your ideal, we talked about the ideal corner, right?
Right.
The perfect coach in your mind.
The perfect coach they'd be a master communicator. They would be really good at communicating. They would be really good at observing both writing errors and then how the person is taking the information they're giving them. They would, like I said, need to be obviously a good rider, but they need to be a good student themselves, and they need to be a really good team player. In other words, be able to operate in a group of other individuals. I think those are the high points. There's probably other minor elements, but that's what we look for in a coach, not necessarily the fastest guy.
I think, master communicator, and especially you've done a really good job of, taking something, distilling it down so that I can understand it, or somebody that's listening can understand it, right? There's the physics of it, and it's like kind of over my head, right? Or it's like, no, but if you're sitting in a car and you're pushing on the dash, like, oh, that makes sense. I can relate to that. I get that. So you mentioned the machine, your school. On your website, you've got pictures of semi trucks and you've got all your staff. And I'm interested in the logistics. Because from the outside looking in, I show up, I get my leathers, I get my bike, somebody follows me around the track. But the logistics of your operation, just looking at everything you have behind you, it has to be massive, not only from where you're at now, but all over the world. Like, it is a monster to manage and run, I would imagine.
Yeah, the logistics are pretty extensive. For example, just in the United States, we rent 1,500 hotel rooms a year, right? And then we've got the catering, we've got tires. We're putting about maybe 350,000 miles on our fleet in a year. So we're burning through tires, there's gas, there's the flights. The coaches are from all over the country, or in some cases, different parts of the world they're coming over. And there's compliance with the truck. So you drive an 18-wheeler, suddenly the compliance is way, way different. You can't drive more than a certain amount of hours, and they have these electronic sort of tattletale things that track everything that you're doing. So if you do it wrong, then you're immediately busted. So you can't really bend the rules on that. And as far as the amount of driving you can do, they also factor in the amount of work you're doing. For example, you were working and then you drove. So you have to count the working hours against like the driving hours as well. Mm-hmm. And of course you could fib, but then that puts you into like one of these complicated situations. In some cases, not being in compliance is more complicated than just following the rules and getting on with it. So the rules are extensive. Just hauling waste tires, having inspections of fire inspections at our facility here, and how everything's stored. And it just goes on and on and on. It's so extensive that sometimes you're like, hey, can we just go out and ride? But we do have a machine that takes care of all that, and everyone has their individual jobs, and it all comes together. But it's a bit of a miracle, really, that it does come together.
It's absolutely incredible. So when you have your special bikes, no BS, lean, slide, braking, do you have those at your schools throughout the world, or is that just where you're at, or are those?
We have them here in the U.S. The Australian branch, I believe, has one or two of those bikes. It often has to do with the space available to use the bikes. For example, the lean bike and the slide bike, they're like, if you go to Phillip Island, their paddock is not very big at all. They don't really have that much paved area. So it really depends on the facilities on being able to use them. We just got back from schools in India and they don't have any spaces. We want to do an off-track drill. We have to do it before we go on the track, just on the straightaway.
Are any other schools, are you the only school that has the special bikes like that?
I bet you there are some others somewhere in the world. I think I've seen a few on social media. So there are definitely other people that employ their training aids, and I think that's really great.
So when you talk about the logistics, you talk about all the things that have to happen to provide training for folks that come to your school. 300, like all the tires you burnt, 300,000 miles on your fleet or whatever it was, tires and hotel rooms and flights. And so when somebody comes on your website and like, I think I'd like to go to Superbike school, and they see the price associated with one or maybe a 2-day camp, it's like, yeah, it's because number one, it's worth it. And I don't want to speak for you, but it's worth it. And, oh yeah, we have a business to run, and that business and that machine costs a lot of money.
Yeah.
So don't let the price, deter you from going to the school. Like, it costs money to run your business to give these people all this instruction.
Yeah. The overhead, I mean, that's the thing, the economics of it. And someone once said to me, economics was the study of how to get what you want with limited resources. And what we're doing, the California Superbike School, is as good as it is within the economics. For example, if we had unlimited resources, then we'd have our own track, and every rider would have 2 bikes. One would have ring tires, one wouldn't. We'd have a individual coach assigned to somebody, and they're getting videoed in every site. We could go to some absolutely amazingly deluxe thing, but the economics simply won't allow that. But for what we do provide, we've gotten quite efficient, so that it's money well spent. It's interesting, over the last, I don't know, probably 15 years, I don't think I've ever heard one person say that wasn't worth it. It was a bit too expensive. Maybe they thought it to themselves, but I haven't heard that. But what I have heard many times is from especially business owners, people who are actual business owners. They'll look around and say, I don't know how you manage to charge so little for this operation. It blows me away. And we've heard that many dozens of times. If someone is looking around at a school day, we've got 23 staff. We got 23 staff. We got 40 motorcycles. We got 2 18-wheelers. It's a lot. But in making decisions, especially when I'm talking to my dad, we'll say, hey, Dad, we could do option A or option B. And you go, oh, well, which one do you think would benefit the students more? Option B, but it'll be a little bit more. It'll cost a little more. He's like, let's do it. That's kind of always been his attitude. If it costs a little more, but it gives a better student experience, let's do it. And so that's really what it's about. After 44 years, the only thing that's going to keep you in business is delivering good training. It's not cutting corners or trying to play around with numbers and be super thrifty. Obviously, you have to be smart, but the main thing is people need to walk in and then walk out better riders and know it.
Do you track metrics on people that return to your school?
Yeah.
We do. Retention rate, I would imagine it's pretty high.
Yeah, we get a lot of return students. We've had some people come back and do the school over 100 times.
100 times.
Yeah. Okay. That's not many, right? But
right.
I think we call them centurions. I think there's like 3 or 4 centurions. People have done over 100 schools with us, but these are guys. They like the school. They like the whole setup. They like the machine. They get along with the staff, and they treat it as theirs. For some of them, it's their therapy. They come out and They ride motorcycles, and they know that they're in an environment where they're going to get good advice. It's safe. Someone's really looking out to make sure that everything's done just right, and they love it.
And that's the real testament to what you're doing. Like, the people keep coming back and coming back and coming back. If your product wasn't good or your service wasn't good, one-offs and like, I don't think I'm going to do that again. So it sounds like you've got the model, which kind of leads into the wrap up here. You have the model, you have the machine, you know what works. Are there any plans in 2024, 2025, any new things coming that we should know about? Any kind of changes to the school or any offerings? Or is it just, this is what works, and you talk to your dad and like, this is what we're going to continue to do?
Yeah, in the business world, you have these ideas of some sort of program to improve something. And there's no shortage of programs, but what there usually is a shortage of is following through the programs that you've laid out for yourself for improvement. And we've laid out a number of programs in the past that we're sticking with to ensure that the students get the best service. And a lot of that has to do with just the coaching quality. So our student experience coaching quality is stick with that and constantly work to figure out how to improve that. That's really what our focus is. Yeah, we're always coming up with new things and new ideas. I don't think that we're really going to change tremendously. The only thing that would really cause us to change would be just the economics of the world would make it so that it's very difficult. You'll notice there are very few arrive and ride schools in the world. Mm. How many track days are there? Track day organizations are there in the United States alone? 60, at least. How many full service arrive and ride schools are there? 2. How many are there in the world? Probably 8. And most of them are our foreign branches. It's something that is the economics are very, very difficult to do. And if we were trying to start from scratch today, probably wouldn't be able to do it. So on one hand, the barrier to entry is so high that we don't really have many competitors. And even if you did, the amount of money to be made in this business is, let's just say it's modest. Okay. But it's too good not to do.
Yeah. I think some people would think you actually have a dream job, but it sounds like it's more of a job than others would expect based on your model and the logistics and the business ownership side of it.
Yeah. And if running a motorcycle school was a cash cow, you'd see a lot more people doing it. Mm-hmm. Right. It's definitely very, very, tricky, tough business. And you go look back in history of all the schools that have started and failed or closed down for one reason or another. It's a long list. And just to stay alive in this business is very, very difficult, but it's a lifestyle. It's a lifestyle business. It's something that you do because you really, really enjoy it. And I think the people that show up as students notice that these people are here for the same reason they are, because they love riding motorcycles. And it's really energizing to be able to provide an experience like the school, because there are similar experiences out there in the world, but for a motorcyclist, something like this is just, in many cases is quite priceless. We've had people come to us and say, this was the best day of my life. And we're like, oh, well, we're really glad it was the best day of your life. And you say, no, listen to what I just said.
Right.
The best day of my life was today. Wow. And not just once. I've heard that probably 8-10 times. And then along with, oh, this was the best day of my year, or this is the best day of the year, or this is the best time I ever had on a motorcycle. When you hear these superlatives, it's definitely motivating to continue doing what we're doing and offer that. So it's very rewarding from that standpoint. We're not working at the Department of Motor Vehicles dealing with irate people.
Yeah. And, these folks have kids and, whatever it is, they've gotten married and like, no, today was the best day of my life. That is an incredible endorsement.
Yeah. And okay, that's not going to be everyone. Some people come and, maybe they thought they were pretty quick, and then they got a big slice of humble pie because they got passed by a bunch of other people, and that happens. And that of course can be quite disappointing when you think you're here, but you find out you're lower. It's happened to me. It's happened to most people along the way, but
Oh yeah. It's happened to me too, many times. 44 years and going. The legacy, I'll let you have the last word. I mean, it's been an incredible conversation. I've learned. You've actually thrown some questions at me, and I was like, wait, I got to be quick on this one. But you have an incredible wealth of knowledge. You do this for a living. You approach it from a very scientific perspective. You know what you're talking about. 44 years in business. I'll let you wrap it up.
It's just as far as something bright to say to people.
Whatever you want to say. What's your message from the California Superbike School to folks that are listening or watching this? What do you want to leave them with?
The California Superbike School was started by Keith Code in 1980, and he had no particular aspirations other than to provide a experience for riders to improve riding and just enjoy it. And for anyone who comes and does get that, then we're happy. We never had any real aspirations to expand nationwide and worldwide. We just wanted to share the fun of riding and getting better as a rider with as many people as possible. And it's a real honor to be able to do that on the scale that we do. And we're going to be able to continue to do that in the foreseeable future.
I love it. Dylan Code, California Superbike School, an amazing conversation. I love these conversations because you kind of wind your way around, but then I learn things, and hopefully people that are watching and listening have learned things and have gotten some insight beyond. You've got some videos, and you've got Twist of the Wrist, and you've got your YouTube channel, and you've got your website, but I feel like you get an inside look into how you do things, why you do things, and most importantly, why you're so passionate about delivering instruction to people on motorcycles. So thank you for being on the show. I've just been blown away at how amazing this is. So Dylan Code, California Superbike School. We'll do it again sometime soon, man. Maybe I'll get on the track with you guys. I don't know. What do you think?
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right.
If not this year, if not now, when, right?
Exactly. The best time to start was when I was 5 years old. The next best time is what? Tomorrow, right? That's what they always say. We're related to this stuff. All right. Thanks for being on the show. We'll wrap it up. Thanks, guys. We'll see you soon.